January 2016, Interior, Brazil. The Jardim das Araucárias condominium had operated without incident for 8 years. 3 towers of middle-class certainty, wrapped in dated security systems and the steady hum of analog surveillance. Then the sensors began firing at night, recording movement in empty hallways. And Mauro found himself trapped between what the cameras showed and what they refused to capture. By the 3rd week, the pattern was undeniable. 7 unexplained access events between 11:40 p.m. and 12:10 a.m., always in corridors with failing coverage, always when rain muffled sound. The property manager wanted documentation before action. The security company denied any breach. And Mauro, who managed 96 units and 320 lives with a paycheck that barely covered his own rent, had to choose between following protocol and trusting what his gut told him about the shadow figure the outdated DVR kept almost catching. The decision came down to a simple calculus. If someone was inside, moving through blind spots with the precision of someone who knew exactly where the cameras failed, how long before they stopped just walking? And if Mauro waited for permission to act, whose door would he be knocking on afterward to explain why he'd done nothing? What followed was 10 nights of amateur detective work, illegal patrols, and the slow realization that the threat wasn't what he'd expected. Some mysteries solve themselves. Others just teach you which questions you shouldn't have asked. Mauro had held the syndic position for 2 years, a role he'd accepted out of civic duty and mild hubris. Before that, he'd managed a hardware store, a job that taught him 2 things. Inventory systems don't lie, and people do. He applied the first lesson to the condominium's operations immediately, creating spreadsheets that tracked everything from elevator maintenance to visitor logs. The second lesson he kept quiet, watching residents smile in the lobby while their unit numbers appeared on late payment reports. The position consumed his evenings. Days belonged to his shop on Rua Visconde, where he sold paint and plumbing supplies to contractors who paid in cash and complained about everything. Nights belonged to email chains with the property management company, budget disputes, and the growing sense that his predecessor had left more problems than the transition documents suggested. His wife, Clarice, had stopped asking about his schedule. She worked morning shifts at the municipal clinic and was asleep by the time he returned from board meetings. Their daughter, Anna, was finishing her first year at the Federal University in the capital, calling once a week to report expenses that always exceeded the budget they'd agreed upon. The distance suited them all, close enough to care, far enough to avoid friction. The condominium itself reflected its residents, functional, aging, quietly desperate to maintain the appearance of prosperity. 3 12-story towers arranged in a U-shape around a central garden that the maintenance crew watered religiously. 96 units, mostly 3-bedroom apartments purchased during the commodity boom years when regional salaries briefly matched metropolitan ambitions. Now, a third of the residents were underwater on their mortgages, and the reserve fund had bled dry, paying for a structural crack repair in Tower C. Security had always been the compromise. 2 guards per shift, employed by a regional contractor whose main qualification was accepting the lowest bid. 4 analog cameras covering the parking garage, lobby, and rear access. An ancient DVR that recorded in 7-day loops, with image quality that turned faces into gray smudges after sunset. The system worked if you defined working as technically functioning. It failed if you expected it to actually identify anyone. Mauro's predecessor had installed motion sensors in the stairwells after a break-in in 2013. Cheap units purchased from a supplier in São Paulo, the kind that triggered at the faintest vibration. They created more work than security, generating false alerts when wind rattled the emergency exit doors or when cats wandered through the ground floor corridors. The guards learned to ignore them. The first genuine anomaly occurred on a Thursday night in early January, during one of the heavy rains that marked the season. Jonas, the new guard, noticed movement on camera 3 which covered the lower garage of Tower B. The angle showed a sliver of the corridor leading to the technical access door, and for approximately 3 seconds, something crossed the frame. Not a person exactly, a distortion. A shape that Jonas later described as someone walking but wrong. He checked the visitor log. Empty. He checked the RFID access system that tracked key fob entries through the tower doors. No records for the previous 2 hours. Jonas was 23, 3 weeks into his first security job, trained via a 2-day course that focused on customer service, and barely mentioned actual protocols. He considered calling Mauro, then reconsidered. False alarms on your first month looked worse than missing something that might be nothing. He noted it in the shift report under observations. Movement detected, camera 3, 11:18 p.m. No identification possible. The notation disappeared into the daily paperwork that Mauro reviewed every Sunday, filtered through 6 other days of equally mundane entries. Eliseo, the veteran guard who'd worked there since the towers opened, found the DVR alert the next morning. The motion detection had logged the timestamp, but the corresponding footage was corrupted, showing only static for the crucial 15 seconds. He cross-referenced the visitor log, found nothing, and made a decision that seemed reasonable at the time. He archived the alert without escalation. The official patrol service had ended 8 months earlier, a casualty of budget cuts. The contract specified that guards would remain in the gatehouse except for emergency situations, monitoring cameras and controlling access. Walking the corridors at night was no longer billable work. Eliseo knew this. He also knew that something felt wrong about the footage, wrong in a way that his 20 years of overnight shifts recognized but couldn't articulate. He wrote a single line in the report: equipment malfunction, camera 3, investigate during maintenance window. The maintenance window was scheduled for March. It was still January. The line would sit in the logbook for 9 weeks before anyone read it carefully. Over the next 72 hours, 3 more events established a pattern that only became visible in retrospect. The emergency stairwell sensor in Tower A triggered twice after 2:00 a.m., both times without corresponding camera evidence. A resident on the 6th floor, a retired schoolteacher named Marisa, called the gatehouse to report someone standing in the hallway, but when Jonas checked the monitor, the corridor was empty. She declined to file a formal complaint. Most significantly, the RFID system logged an access at 3:47 a.m. on Sunday with the designation "no number." The system, a decade-old installation from a defunct Portuguese manufacturer, was supposed to assign every key fob a unique identifier. When it failed, it generated error codes. It had never shown "no number" before. Mauro reviewed the week's report Sunday afternoon, sitting in the cramped back office that doubled as a storage room for cleaning supplies. The smell of chlorine mixed with the humidity that never quite left the concrete walls. He'd developed a system for these reviews: scan for anomalies, cross-reference with maintenance tickets, flag anything that repeated. The "no number" entry stopped him. He pulled the user manual from the filing cabinet, a water-stained document that the previous syndic had left behind. Page 47 explained error codes. Page 48 detailed the access log format. Nowhere did it mention "no number" as a valid output. He checked the DVR timestamps against the RFID log and discovered they didn't match. The DVR was running 9 minutes fast. Had been for weeks, maybe months. Someone should have noticed. Nobody had. The discrepancy meant that correlating camera footage with access events was impossible without manual calculation. Every incident existed in a cloud of temporal uncertainty. That evening, he called an emergency meeting with Jonas, Eliseo, and Beatriz from the property management company. He laid out the incidents on a timeline he'd drawn by hand, using the office's single whiteboard. 4 sensors, 1 corrupted video, 1 unexplained RFID entry, a 9-minute clock error. Beatriz, a woman in her early 50s who'd managed the property since construction, listened with the expression of someone hearing a familiar complaint. She'd dealt with dozens of syndics, most of whom discovered urgent problems that dissolved under scrutiny. Her response was practiced. Security assessments require board approval. The contract doesn't include internal patrols. Any service expansion needs a budget amendment. Mauro pressed the issue. Something's using our blind spots. Or, Beatrice countered, you have equipment failures and a new guard who's jumpy. Jonas flinched but said nothing. Eliseo studied his hands. The meeting ended with a compromise that satisfied nobody. Mauro would document everything for 10 days. They'd discuss it at the next board session, and meanwhile the guards would increase vigilance through undefined means that required no contract modification. Mauro spent that night unable to sleep, running scenarios. Best case, equipment failure creating phantom events. Worst case, someone with access codes was entering at will, testing security response times. Middle case, and somehow most disturbing, a resident was using the technical corridors for reasons they wanted hidden. He made his decision before dawn. He would conduct his own patrols 3 nights, midnight to 1:00 a.m., unofficial, unpaid, and possibly illegal depending on insurance interpretations. He'd bring the master maintenance key, a VHF radio, and a notebook. If he found nothing, he'd have peace of mind. If he found something, he'd have evidence to force action. The risk calculation was simple, his credibility against residents' safety. If an incident occurred and he'd done nothing, the blame would land on him regardless of bureaucratic limitations. If he acted outside his authority and was discovered, he could claim diligence and accept whatever consequences followed. Clarice noticed him leaving the apartment at 11:30 p.m. Monday night. She didn't ask. The first patrol revealed nothing except how different the building felt after midnight. The fluorescent lights hummed differently, or maybe he'd never noticed. The corridors amplified every sound, his footsteps echoing off concrete walls that absorbed nothing. He checked each sensor location, found them silent, returned to the gatehouse by 12:45 a.m. Tuesday night, he found the technical access door between towers A and B unlatched, not forced open, simply not engaged. The door required an RFID key and a physical turn of the handle to seal properly. Someone had opened it and failed to ensure closure. He photographed it with his phone, noted the time, 12:32 a.m., and secured it manually. Back at the gatehouse, Jonas's shift log showed a visitor entry at 11:51 p.m. No ID number recorded. The notes said, "Resident confirmed via intercom." Mauro checked the corresponding apartment. The intercom had been disconnected 3 weeks earlier during renovations. He kept his voice level. "Walk me through the entry." Jonas swallowed. "Guy said it was a delivery. I called up, someone answered, said, okay. I let him through." "What did he look like?" "I was on the phone. Personal call. I just heard his voice." "The camera?" "Side gate." "You know it doesn't work." The side gate camera had been dead for 11 months, waiting for a part that the manufacturer no longer stocked. The blind spot was documented, accepted, and now exploited. Mauro documented everything. Jonas's failure. The unlatched door, the disconnected intercom, the pattern forming in the gaps. Wednesday night, 1:14 a.m., his radio crackled. Not a voice. A signal pulse, 3 short bursts. He recognized it immediately. The motion sensor alert tone, a feature he'd requested years ago when there was still money for upgrades. Sensor B3. Basement level 3. Technical corridor. He descended 2 flights of concrete stairs, each step amplifying in the stairwell. The basement smelled of water and rust, the building's foundation exposed in raw concrete. The door to the pump room stood slightly open. Inside, nothing. Machinery quiet, pipes intact. But on the floor, near the electrical panel, an ID badge. Plastic, faded, with the logo of the security company. The photo was bleached by time, unidentifiable. The expiration date, March 2014. He picked it up, sealed it in a plastic bag he'd brought for exactly this purpose, and returned to ground level. His hands were steady. His heart was not. Thursday morning, he presented everything to Beatrice. The unlatched door, Jonas's protocol failure, the badge, the repeating sensor pattern. The security company denied it immediately. That badge format was discontinued, could have been lost, discarded, found by anyone. Beatrice's response was careful. "We need more concrete evidence before opening a formal investigation." More concrete than unauthorized access? Proof of unauthorized access. Right now we have equipment anomalies and a lost badge. The institutional friction was exhausting. Mauro saw immediate risk. Beatrice saw legal liability and contract termination costs. They compromised on a 15-day audit with a temporary security team rotation, buying time while solving nothing. The new team arrived the following Monday, older men from a competing company, less friendly, more procedural. They reviewed the logs, checked the equipment, and within 3 days noticed something Mauro had missed: electromagnetic interference. Between 11:40 p.m. and 12:10 a.m., cameras 5 and 6, both in the lower garage, experienced signal degradation. Not complete failure, just enough contrast loss to make identification impossible. The pattern repeated nightly. The building's electrician examined the system. Someone's using a jammer. Cheap device, short range. Probably less than 30 meters from the cameras. The implication settled over the group like cold water. This wasn't equipment failure or random coincidence. Someone was actively manipulating the security system with knowledge of its vulnerabilities and the precise timing to exploit them. Mauro compiled the full documentation. 7 sensor activations without explanation. 1 unlatched technical door. 1 outdated security badge. 1 visitor entry with protocol failure. 2 cameras experiencing identical timed interference. He presented it to Beatrice with a single request: formal investigation. This time, she agreed. The investigation took 3 weeks and cost 11,000 reais from the reserve fund. The security company's internal audit revealed that they'd maintained 3 legacy RFID keys from the old system, never documented in transfer records. 1 had been reported missing 2 months earlier, a detail buried in internal emails and never communicated to the condominium. The no number access log matched the time window when legacy keys would trigger but not identify properly. The interference pattern aligned with someone testing the security response, mapping blind spots, confirming that the monitoring was passive rather than active. Who? The investigation never conclusively determined. The working theory: a former security employee, someone with institutional knowledge and a grudge or opportunity. No arrest was made, no charges filed. The security company's contract was terminated. They paid a settlement to avoid litigation, and new systems were installed at cost. The board approved a complete security overhaul. Modern digital cameras with night vision. A new access control system with biometric backup. Most significantly, contracted patrol services reinstated, 2 rounds per night, with logged checkpoints. Mauro received informal praise and formal criticism. Some residents viewed him as diligent. Others thought he'd overreacted. The property management company issued a written warning about operating outside defined responsibilities, then quietly withdrew it after legal review suggested they'd be liable for discouraging reasonable security concerns. His term ended 6 months later. He didn't run for re-election. The community changed in subtle ways. Parents stopped letting children play in the garage. Evening dog walkers now traveled in pairs. A WhatsApp group formed for neighborhood watch, though most posts were about parking disputes. The sense of violation lingered longer than the actual threat. 3 months after the new system went live, Mauro visited to drop off some final documentation. He stopped by the security office, now staffed by professional guards in actual uniforms. The monitors showed crisp, clear images from 16 cameras. "Any problems?" he asked. The guard glanced at a log. "Just one thing. Sensor B3 still triggers sometimes, between 11:50 and midnight, every few nights." "What's on the camera?" "Nothing. Corridor's empty. Equipment malfunction?" That's what the text said. Replace the sensor twice. Still happens. Mauro didn't ask more questions. He signed the transfer documents and left. The final investigation report, archived in June 2016, contained 1 unresolved item. Recurring activation, sensor B3, 23:50:000 hours. Cause, undetermined. Status, monitoring. The board voted to accept the report as complete. The property management company closed the file. Sensor B3 still activates occasionally, according to residents who've noticed. The current security team logs it as environmental interference and moves on. The new syndic hasn't raised concerns. The cameras show nothing. The system functions. Everyone sleeps. Almost everyone. Mauro still drives past the towers sometimes on his way home from the shop. The buildings look the same, lights in windows, cars in the garage, the rhythm of ordinary life. He wonders occasionally what the sensor detects, whether it's a glitch in hardware or something the cameras aren't built to capture, whether some presences announce themselves through absence, visible only in the spaces between what gets recorded and what gets seen. He never parks, never stops, just drives past, checking his mirrors more often than necessary, and continues home. The sensor keeps its schedule, faithful as a clock, marking time in the empty corridor where nothing moves and nothing shows on screen. Administrators call it a technical anomaly. Residents call it nothing at all, because most don't know it exists. The building continues, life continues, and in the basement of Tower B, between 11:50 p.m. and midnight, something still crosses the threshold that the machines can measure but cannot name.